Imagine standing in a crowded arena where the future of an entire civilization is being decided not by philosophers, not by scholars, not by those who have spent lifetimes studying the intricate machinery of human nature and governance, but by whoever can scream the loudest, promise the most, and make the crowd feel something, anything, in the hollow pit of their restless hearts. Now imagine that the person who wins this contest, the one who rises to command armies, shape laws, and determine the fate of millions, is not chosen for their wisdom or their virtue or their understanding of the delicate balance between freedom and responsibility. They are chosen because they knew exactly which buttons to press, which fears to amplify, which desires to stroke until the masses couldn't help but surrender their judgment at the altar of spectacle. Today, we will explore a powerful idea from Plato, one that remains almost prophetic. The notion that democracy, when misunderstood, unintentionally lifts the least prepared individuals into positions of enormous influence and stay until the very end. Because the final insight is the most important, the one that Plato considered fundamental for understanding why societies collapse from within. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, comment below, and share this video. We are about to uncover ideas that may completely change the way you see politics, society, and even your own role in shaping the future. What you will hear today is not just philosophy, it is a mirror held up to our modern world. This journey begins with Plato observing his own society, a place where public opinion shifted like the wind, where leaders were chosen not by knowledge or virtue, but by the ability to charm and persuade. This is not a hypothetical nightmare. This is democracy without discipline. This is what Plato witnessed in ancient Athens, and what he warned would happen again and again throughout human history, a warning we have either forgotten or chosen to ignore. Think about this carefully. In a system designed to give voice to the people, what happens when the people lose the capacity to distinguish between truth and manipulation? What happens when the crowd becomes so intoxicated by their own freedom that they can no longer recognize when that freedom is being weaponized against them? What happens when the very mechanism meant to protect society from tyranny becomes the vehicle that delivers it? Plato saw it with devastating clarity. He watched as Athens, the birthplace of democracy, elevated leaders not because they were prepared to lead, but because they were skilled at flattery, at telling people exactly what they wanted to hear, at transforming governance into performance and politics into entertainment. He observed how easily admiration could be manufactured, how quickly charisma could eclipse competence, and how a population drunk on unrestrained liberty would inevitably choose the sweetest poison over the bitter medicine of truth. But here's where the paradox becomes truly unsettling. The problem wasn't democracy itself. The problem was what democracy becomes when its citizens lose their inner compass, when they abandon the discipline required to wield freedom responsibly, when they mistake the right to speak for the wisdom to speak well. Democracy, Plato argued, is only as strong as the character of its citizens. And when that character erodes, when people prioritize pleasure over principle, when they seek leaders who mirror their impulses rather than challenge them, when they confuse confidence with capability, the system doesn't just fail, it transforms into something far more dangerous. Consider the emotional weight of this revelation. Every vote you cast, every leader you admire, every political movement you support is not just a reflection of your preferences. It is a mirror held up to your soul. It reveals whether you have cultivated the inner discipline to choose wisely, or whether you are ruled by the same unexamined desires that have brought down civilizations before yours. This is not about left or right, progressive or conservative. This is about something far more fundamental, the capacity of human beings to govern themselves before they attempt to govern others. And here lies the great question that will haunt this entire exploration. If democracy naturally elevates those who are best at manipulation rather than those who are best at leadership, are we doomed to repeat this cycle forever? Or is there a way to break free from this psychological trap that Plato identified over 2,000 years ago? The answer is more disturbing and more empowering than you might imagine, because what Plato understood, what he tried desperately to convey to his contemporaries and to future generations, is that the rise of incompetent leaders is not a political problem. It is a psychological one. It is a spiritual one. It is a crisis of the individual soul multiplied across an entire society. And until we understand the hidden mechanisms that make us vulnerable to the charismatic charlatan, the confident fool, the entertainer disguised as a statesman, we will continue to hand our freedom to those least qualified to protect it. The journey ahead will force you to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about the leaders you see on television or the politicians you read about online, but about yourself, about the desires you've left unexamined, about the fears you've refused to acknowledge, about the part of you that secretly craves the simplicity of a single voice telling you everything will be okay, even when that voice is leading you toward destruction. The mechanism Plato identified operates in the shadows of human consciousness, invisible to those caught within its grip, yet painfully obvious to anyone willing to examine it with honest eyes. The hidden problem is not that democracy produces bad leaders. It is that democracy, when stripped of virtue and discipline, creates the perfect psychological conditions for citizens to demand bad leaders, to crave them, to elevate them with enthusiastic devotion while believing they are exercising wisdom. Here lies the unsettling truth. The incompetent leader does not force his way into power. He is invited. He is summoned by a population that has lost the capacity to govern its own desires, a society that mistakes the freedom to choose for the wisdom to choose well. Plato understood that human beings, left to their own unexamined impulses, naturally gravitate toward pleasure, comfort, and the path of least resistance. We are drawn to the storyteller who makes us feel good rather than the truth-teller who makes us uncomfortable. We prefer the leader who flatters our prejudices over the one who challenges our assumptions. Sigmund Freud would later articulate this mechanism through his concept of the unconscious mind, that vast reservoir of desires, fears, and impulses that operates beneath our awareness yet shapes our every decision. The unconscious, Freud explained, seeks immediate gratification and resists the discipline required for genuine growth. When an entire society operates from this unconscious level, when citizens make political choices based on unexamined desires rather than conscious reflection, they become vulnerable to leaders who understand how to manipulate those hidden drives. Carl Jung expanded this understanding by introducing the concept of the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the dark impulses we project outward rather than confronting within. A society that refuses to examine its own shadow, Jung warned, will inevitably project those unacknowledged qualities onto its leaders. The charismatic demagogue becomes a vessel carrying the collective unconscious of millions, embodying both their unexpressed rage and their unmet longings. This explains why people can love a leader fiercely even when that leader violates every principle they claim to hold sacred. They are not loving the leader, they are loving the reflection of their own disowned desires. Plato saw this pattern with remarkable prescience. He observed that when democracy opens the door for every voice to be heard, something beautiful emerges, but also something dangerous. Because in a world where every desire demands satisfaction, where every impulse claims equal validity, discipline becomes rare. Self-mastery becomes an antiquated notion. The hard work of examining one's own motivations, of questioning one's own biases, of cultivating the inner strength required to resist manipulation, all of this falls away in the pursuit of immediate gratification. This is why Plato insisted that only those trained in reason, ethics, and self-mastery should guide a society. Not because he was elitist, but because he understood human psychology with brutal honesty. He recognized that the human mind, when left undisciplined, becomes a marketplace where the most seductive ideas win, regardless of their truth. The leader who offers simple answers, who promises to eliminate complexity, who claims he alone can fix everything, this leader will always triumph over the thoughtful philosopher who admits uncertainty and demands that citizens do the difficult work of thinking for themselves. Arthur Schopenhauer later echoed this insight when he wrote about the will, that blind, irrational force that drives human behavior beneath the veneer of reason. Most people, Schopenhauer argued, are not guided by rational thought, but by unconscious drives they neither understand nor control. Democracy, in this light, becomes a system where these blind wills collide, where unexamined desires compete for dominance, and where the leader most skilled at channeling those irrational forces rises to the top. The emotional core of this hidden problem cuts even deeper. When you look at the leaders your society has chosen, you are not merely looking at political figures. You are looking at a collective psychological portrait, a mirror reflecting the inner state of millions of individuals who believed they were making rational choices but were actually responding to unexamined fears, unmet needs, and carefully manipulated emotions. The leader who promises everything, who claims easy solutions to complex problems, who transforms governance into entertainment, This leader succeeds precisely because the population has abandoned the difficult work of self-examination. And here's where the trap becomes almost inescapable. The more a society drifts toward this state, the more it resists any attempt to wake up from it. Citizens who have chosen leaders based on emotional manipulation do not want to be told they were manipulated. They defend their choice with increasing ferocity, because to admit the manipulation would require confronting their own psychological vulnerabilities. The problem perpetuates itself, generation after generation, as societies oscillate between chaotic freedom and authoritarian control, never quite understanding that both extremes emerge from the same root cause: the failure of individuals to cultivate inner discipline before seeking to exercise outer freedom. The consequences of this psychological vulnerability do not announce themselves with fanfare or dramatic revelation. They unfold gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a fog settling over a landscape until no one can remember what clear visibility felt like. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of Plato's warning. The transformation happens so slowly that each generation believes the current state of affairs is normal, that the steady erosion of wisdom in favor of spectacle is simply how things have always been. Think about what happens inside a society that has begun prioritizing pleasure over discipline, opinion over knowledge, impulse over reflection. The change does not occur all at once. It happens through 1,000 small surrenders, 1,000,000 tiny choices to seek comfort rather than truth. Social networks amplify this tendency, creating echo chambers where the loudest voices drown out the wisest, where popularity becomes more valuable than expertise, where attention that most precious and manipulable of currencies determines who rises to influence and who fades into obscurity. Plato observed this in Athens as public discourse transformed into a marketplace of persuasion rather than a forum for wisdom. The philosopher, the scientist, the seasoned statesman, those who had spent years cultivating knowledge and understanding, found themselves ignored in favor of individuals who mastered spectacle, emotion, and outrage. The crowd did not gather to hear uncomfortable truths. They gathered to have their existing beliefs confirmed, their prejudices validated, their desires reflected back to them in increasingly amplified form. Modern neuroscience reveals why this pattern is so difficult to escape. The human brain is wired with cognitive biases that make us vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Plato described. Confirmation bias ensures we seek information that supports what we already believe, while dismissing evidence that challenges our worldview. The availability heuristic makes us overweight information that is emotionally vivid or recently encountered, even when that information is statistically insignificant. Social proof, our tendency to believe something is correct because many others believe it, creates cascading effects where popularity becomes indistinguishable from validity. These neurological tendencies, which once served our ancestors in small tribal groups, become weapons in the hands of leaders who understand how to exploit them. The charismatic figure learns to craft messages that trigger emotional responses before rational analysis can engage. He speaks in simple narratives that our pattern-seeking brains find irresistible. He identifies external enemies to activate our tribal instincts, creating an us versus them dynamic that short-circuits critical thinking. And because he offers certainty in a complex world, our anxiety-prone nervous systems reward us with relief when we surrender our judgment to his confident pronouncements. Carl Jung warned that when societies develop shadow qualities, those dark impulses they refuse to acknowledge, they become vulnerable to leaders who embody those unresolved tensions. A population that claims to value peace while harboring unexpressed rage, that professes compassion while nursing deep resentments, that celebrates reason while acting from emotion, such a society will unconsciously seek leaders who give permission to express what has been repressed. The leader does not create these impulses. He simply recognizes them and offers himself as their instrument. This explains a phenomenon that bewilders many observers. Why do people continue supporting leaders who clearly act against their interests? Why do they ignore evidence of incompetence, corruption, or cruelty? The answer lies in understanding that the relationship between the masses and their chosen leader is not primarily rational. It is psychological, even primal. The leader has become a symbolic figure onto whom millions project their frustrations, their hopes, their sense of identity. To abandon that leader would require abandoning a part of themselves they have invested in his image. Plato recognized this emotional turbulence within democratic societies. Citizens feel they are free, yet they experience a persistent restlessness. They feel powerful, yet harbor deep insecurity. They chase pleasure but rarely find satisfaction. In this state of chronic dissatisfaction, they begin craving someone who can simplify the overwhelming complexity of modern existence. Someone who speaks boldly, acts decisively, and provides external targets for internal problems. The leader who emerges from this psychological need does not appear suddenly. He grows organically from a culture that rewards confidence over competence, that mistakes certainty for knowledge, that confuses the ability to perform with the capacity to govern. The unseen consequence reaches its most dangerous form when entertainment becomes indistinguishable from governance. When political discourse transforms into a stage where those most adept at performance rise highest, the very concept of leadership undergoes a fundamental distortion. Governance requires patience, nuance, the ability to weigh competing values, and navigate uncertainty. Performance requires the opposite: bold gestures, simple messages, the appearance of decisive action, even when thoughtful deliberation would serve better. A society trapped in this state loses the ability to distinguish between these two entirely different skill sets. The performer who makes them feel something, anything in their emotionally deadened state, becomes indistinguishable from the leader who could actually solve complex problems. And because feelings are immediate while consequences unfold over time, the performer always wins. The crowd awards power to the one who provides the most compelling show, never realizing until far too late that spectacle and substance are not the same thing. This moment represents a critical juncture in Plato's analysis. Democracy, lacking the virtue and discipline necessary to sustain it, does not remain stable. Its weaknesses accumulate like debts that must eventually be paid. And the payment comes when the leader, elevated by desire, grows impatient with the limits placed upon him. When citizens overwhelmed by their own dissatisfaction welcome stronger control, believing it will restore the order their undisciplined freedom destroyed. The path to freedom from this psychological trap does not begin where most people expect. It does not start with electing better leaders, reforming political systems, or creating new institutions designed to protect democracy from its own weaknesses. These external solutions, while potentially valuable, address symptoms rather than the disease. The rebellion Plato envisioned the true revolution that could break this cycle begins in the most unlikely and most difficult place, within the individual human soul. This is the radical insight that separates Plato's philosophy from mere political theory. He understood that the quality of a society's leaders is inseparable from the quality of its citizens' inner lives. A population that has not learned to govern its own desires cannot possibly choose governors who will resist exploiting those desires. A society that lacks self-discipline will inevitably select leaders who promise to free them from the responsibility that self-discipline demands. The external world, Plato insisted, is always a reflection of internal states multiplied across millions of individuals. Consider what this means for you personally. Every time you find yourself drawn to a leader who offers simple answers to complex problems, who promises certainty in uncertain times, who claims he alone can fix what others have failed to repair, pause and examine what is happening inside you. What fear is being activated? What desire is being stroked? What part of yourself are you projecting onto this figure? The moment you begin asking these questions, you step outside the psychological mechanism that makes manipulation possible. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing centuries after Plato, articulated a similar rebellion. He warned that when people avoid responsibility, they open the door to those who claim they can carry that burden for them. The path to genuine freedom, Nietzsche argued, requires embracing what he called self-overcoming, the difficult, lifelong work of confronting your own weaknesses, questioning your own assumptions, and developing the inner strength to stand alone when necessary. This is not the freedom democracy promises, the freedom to do whatever feels good in the moment. This is a deeper freedom, the freedom that comes from mastering yourself before attempting to master your circumstances. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered a profound truth about human psychology that directly addresses Plato's concerns. In the most extreme conditions imaginable, Frankl observed that the prisoners who maintained their humanity were not those who had the easiest circumstances, but those who had cultivated an inner life that external conditions could not destroy. They had developed what Frankl called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose their attitude regardless of their situation. This internal sovereignty is precisely what Plato believed democratic citizens needed to cultivate in order to protect their external freedom. The practical rebellion, then, begins with a series of uncomfortable practices. First, you must learn to recognize when you are being manipulated emotionally. This requires developing what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking. When you feel a surge of anger at an external enemy, when you experience relief at a simple explanation for a complex problem, when you find yourself certain that one leader has all the answers, these are moments to pause and examine what psychological buttons are being pressed. Second, you must practice the ancient art of self-examination that Socrates championed and Plato recorded. This means regularly asking yourself difficult questions. What desires am I leaving unexamined? What fears am I refusing to acknowledge? What aspects of my own character am I projecting onto political figures? Am I seeking leaders who will challenge me to grow, or leaders who will confirm what I already believe? The discomfort these questions produce is itself valuable. It indicates you are approaching something real. Third, you must cultivate what the Stoics called inner citadel, a core of reasoned judgment that external circumstances cannot breach. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected from emotion. It means developing the capacity to feel deeply while not being controlled by those feelings, to care passionately while not letting passion override judgment. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, practiced this discipline daily, reminding himself that he could not control external events, but could always control his response to them. Historical examples illuminate this path. Socrates himself, when Athens descended into mob rule and demanded he participate in an unjust execution, refused, even though refusal meant risking his own life. He had cultivated such inner discipline that external pressure could not force him to violate his principles. Thomas More, facing execution for refusing to endorse King Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church, maintained his integrity because his inner convictions were stronger than his fear of death. These individuals demonstrated that the rebellion against tyranny, whether democratic or authoritarian, begins with the refusal to betray your own reasoned judgment. But Plato's rebellion goes further still. It requires not just personal discipline, but a commitment to truth that transcends personal comfort. This means being willing to question leaders you admire when they stray from principle. It means resisting the tribal instinct to defend your side, regardless of evidence. It means valuing accuracy over victory in every argument, conversation, and political decision. It means recognizing that the person who tells you uncomfortable truths may be serving you better than the one who tells you what you want to hear. The most counterintuitive aspect of this rebellion is that it demands you give up the very thing democracy seems to promise, the right to have your desires satisfied. Plato's vision requires accepting that not all desires deserve satisfaction, that some impulses should be resisted, that wisdom sometimes means saying no to yourself. This is why the rebellion feels so difficult. It asks you to voluntarily embrace the discipline that undisciplined freedom allows you to avoid. Yet here lies the paradox that makes this rebellion worthwhile. The more you develop inner discipline, the freer you actually become. Free from manipulation. Free from the tyranny of your own unexamined impulses. Free from the need to surrender your judgment to charismatic figures who promise to think for you. This is the freedom that survives, even when external freedoms are stripped away. The freedom that no leader can grant or remove, because it exists entirely within your own consciousness. Now we arrive at the threshold of the deepest truth, the insight Plato considered so fundamental that without grasping it, all other understanding remains incomplete. This is not merely another philosophical observation or political strategy. This is the revelation that reframes everything that transforms how you see power, freedom, society, and the very nature of human existence. Prepare yourself, because once you truly understand this, you cannot unknow it. The world as you have perceived it will never look quite the same again. The ultimate truth is this: tyranny does not rise because of the ambitions of one man. Tyranny rises because citizens have abandoned the virtues required to keep freedom alive. The fall of democracy begins with the fall of the individual. When a person neglects discipline, avoids truth, and seeks constant pleasure, they lose the inner strength needed to choose wisely. The society becomes a reflection of that weakness. And when enough individuals fall into this state, the collective loses the capacity to distinguish between those who promise comfort and those who offer wisdom. Let this sink in completely. Every tyranny, every collapse of democratic institutions, every transformation of liberty into oppression, these are not primarily political failures. They are spiritual failures. They are the accumulated consequences of millions of individuals who chose ease over effort, entertainment over enlightenment, the comfort of certainty over the discomfort of truth. The tyrant is not an external force that invades a healthy society. The tyrant is the shadow the society itself has created through its collective abandonment of self-mastery. Plato watched this unfold in Athens with a clarity that must have been agonizing. He saw citizens who claimed to love freedom gradually surrendering that freedom to a leader who promised to protect them from the chaos their own undisciplined desires had created. He observed how the leader, elevated by the crowd's desires, eventually became the master of those desires. No longer a representative of the people, he became the ruler of the people. The unrestrained freedom that once allowed every voice to shout collapsed into a system where only one voice mattered. But here is where the revelation becomes truly profound, where it moves from historical observation to existential truth. This transformation is not an accident. It is not a tragic mistake that could be avoided through better institutions or smarter voting. It is the natural, inevitable consequence of a fundamental law of human psychology and social organization. Freedom without wisdom destroys itself. Liberty without discipline becomes its own prison. Democracy without virtue is merely a temporary stage in the cycle between chaos and tyranny. Plato's ultimate message is simultaneously sobering and empowering. Sobering because it reveals that there is no external savior, no perfect system, no institutional design that can protect you from the consequences of your own psychological vulnerabilities. The collapse of democracy into tyranny is always an inside job, a collective suicide born from individual failures of character multiplied across an entire population, but empowering because it means you are not helpless. The transformation begins with you, not with presidents or politicians or public figures. With you, in the privacy of your own mind, in the daily choices you make about what to believe and who to trust, in your willingness to do the difficult work of self-examination. This is where democracy is either saved or lost. Every vote you cast is a mirror of your inner state. Every leader you support reflects your character. Every political choice reveals whether you have cultivated the discipline to choose wisely, or whether you are ruled by the unexamined desires that have brought down civilizations throughout history. This is not comfortable to accept. It places the weight of responsibility exactly where most people wish to avoid it, on your own shoulders. Yet, this is also the path to genuine power. Not the power to control others, but the power to free yourself from being controlled. Not the power to impose your will on society, but the power to prevent society from imposing its delusions on you. This is the freedom that survives when external freedoms collapse, the strength that endures when institutions fail, the wisdom that persists when popular opinion shifts like sand. The future of democracy does not depend on finding better leaders. It depends on creating better citizens. Citizens willing to think deeply, question boldly, and act responsibly. Citizens who understand that the stability of a nation begins in the discipline of a single mind, your mind. Citizens who recognize that the freedom of a people is inseparable from the freedom they cultivate within themselves. This is Plato's final gift to us, the understanding that we are not victims of some external force destroying our democratic institutions. We are participants in a psychological and spiritual drama that unfolds according to principles as reliable as gravity. When individuals abandon self-mastery, societies lose the capacity for self-governance. When citizens choose comfort over character, they inevitably choose tyrants over truth-tellers. The cycle is predictable, observable, and entirely preventable, but only through the transformation of individual consciousness. So the question that remains, the question you must answer not with words, but with your life, is this: will you be the citizen democracy needs to survive? Will you do the difficult inner work that makes external freedom possible? Will you cultivate the discipline, the wisdom, the self-awareness that allows you to resist manipulation and choose leaders based on character rather than charisma? The answer to this question determines not just the fate of your society, but the quality of your own existence. Because the person who develops genuine inner freedom cannot be enslaved by tyrants, manipulated by demagogues, or swept away by collective delusion. That person becomes a lighthouse in the storm, a point of sanity in a world gone mad, a living proof that another way is possible. This is the ultimate truth Plato wanted you to understand. The world does not need perfect leaders. It needs awakened citizens. And the awakening begins now, in this moment, with the choice you make to either examine yourself honestly or continue drifting with the crowd toward the destination history has shown us again and again the transformation of freedom into tyranny of democracy, into despotism of collective self-governance, into submission to a single will. The choice has always been yours. It remains yours now, and what you do with it will echo not just in your own life, but in the fabric of the society you help to create or destroy with every thought, every choice, every moment of awareness or unconsciousness. Choose wisely. The future is watching.